Welcome back to the Quillette Cetera podcast. You're with me, Zoe Booth, and today I'm with the writer David Kaufman. His recent Quillette piece, The Art of Middle Eastern Pillow Talk, really struck a chord with me. I found it incredibly moving, vulnerable, honest, beautifully written, and also weirdly close to home for reasons that I'll get to later. David is a seasoned journalist with more than 2 decades of experience covering politics, identity, culture, and the Middle East. He's reported extensively from Israel and the Palestinian territories. He's spent a time living in Tel Aviv, and he speaks fluent Hebrew. He's also held senior editorial roles at the New York Post and the New York Times. These days, he serves as an adjunct fellow at the Tel Aviv Institute. A bit of background on David because it's very interesting and pertinent to our chat. David is the son of a Black Baptist from Texas and a white Ashkenazi Jewish mother, and he grew up in San Francisco. As if that wasn't interesting enough, he's also gay and the father of 2 young boys. And in his recent piece for Quillette, which if you haven't read, I highly recommend you do, we've also published a narrated video essay version of it on our YouTube, or you can listen to it as a podcast. In this recent piece, he recounts an unexpected encounter with a Palestinian man in New York, a meeting that begins as a hookup and turns into an unflinching and at times uncomfortable debate about the war in Gaza, as you can imagine. His essay and this podcast conversation restored my faith that we can have really difficult conversations with people who we deeply disagree with on issues that we deeply care about. It's the kind of conversation that we rarely hear in public anymore, and it's the type of conversation that we try to foster here at Quillette. So here's my conversation with David Kaufman. I hope you enjoy it. I definitely did. If you do enjoy it, as always, please share it with someone. Share it with someone you really, really disagree with. See what they think. Maybe you'll become friends. Without much further ado, let's get into this conversation with David Kaufman. Let's start perhaps with your piece.
Sure.
That's what I'm most excited about. And excited is the right term because it's a
Yeah.
very sexy piece. Could you explain to our audience maybe a little bit about your piece and what prompted it?
Okay. Well, I mean, I had a corporate job for a long time working at the New York Post, so I had to sort of toe the line and be as respectable as possible, and also had to honor the fact that I have children. But I left that job and felt like it was time to sort of write my truth or write about things that I found more interesting. Even though the things I've been writing about are interesting, I've been writing about a lot about Israel and Zionism, anti-Semitism, and the interworkings of global governments in these sort of structures. And, this summer I found myself home one night, on a hookup app, and,
Grinder?
it wasn't Grinder.
Wasn't Grinder. Okay, that's all I know. That's the extent of
And,
my knowledge.
but it doesn't matter. Names don't matter. And I connected with this guy. His name was, we'll call him Amir, as I do in the
Good name.
story. And, Amir is one of these names that can be both Hebrew and English. Sorry, Hebrew and Arabic. So I bid him a shalom. He said, no, I'm not Israeli. I'm Palestinian. So I bid him a salam, tisharafna, which is nice to meet you in Arabic. And, he was a little bit awkward, but he was like, oh, it's no big deal. It happens all the time. And then he proceeded to invite me over. We had a very nice time together. And afterwards, we found ourselves in this post-coital moment. And suddenly he started talking about the genocide. And I was like, oh boy, here we go. I knew it was too good to be true.
Did you feel like it was going to come? Like as soon as you realized he was Palestinian, were you like, oh, I want, this is gonna.
No, it didn't seem like that was sort of fait accompli, although I suppose perhaps I was being naive. But no, we didn't have any sort of political conversation. I didn't think it would come like that because it sort of happened, we were sort of, lying around languidly, as one might say. And, suddenly he referred to genocide, and the reference erupted from him in reference to being a father. I had been speaking about my own children, and he said to me, oh, so many of my fellow Palestinians feel, gay and straight, feel this need to have children because we've lost so many in the genocide. That's how it happened. So it was a very unexpected and very precise way of introducing this conversation into this moment. And I was just like, oh boy, that's okay, that's interesting. I'm not sure what to do about this, if I want to do anything about this. No, I was gonna say I have a friend who's been in this situation a few times. He's like much more kind of he kind of he sort of tosses them out. He gets very confrontational with them. And I didn't feel he wasn't he was a kind of a good guy. I mean, I didn't he was a nice guy. Like there's no need to sort of like bear arms.
Yes. Do you think he was purposely provoking you with that term genocide?
No, that's actually what's so interesting. I was actually very intrigued in a way, impressed, but also very intrigued by the sort of confidence in which he used that phrase and the lack of any sense of hesitance or
Yes.
self-reflection, as if he just assumed that I would be on the genocide bandwagon with him and that we would have like, I would completely, affirm and understand and elevate and promote his worldview. And like, he found himself in bed with the wrong Jew. So
Is that partly because in New York there are so many Jews for Palestine, anti-Zionist Jews?
I don't think he thought I was Jewish. I think that
He didn't know you were
Well,
Jewish.
we had never discussed it. I mean, there had been no reason to discuss it, and most people don't necessarily assume I'm Jewish. So I think it didn't occur to him. It doesn't matter though. I mean, there are so many people in general who are
It's moving.
who believe in the genocide and who think that, Israel is doing all these, terrible, horrible things. I think that he just has become, it's so expected now amongst a certain class,
Yes.
amongst a certain type. And I mean, I guess my outward appearance of type does not necessarily fit my inward appearance of type. And
Mm.
so we wound up in this interesting position, which I actually thought felt like an opportunity.
Yeah. I would argue it's not even just a certain sort of class of people who believe that there's a genocide. I think it is the only acceptable opinion to have about Israel. You just have to, I grew up in a fairly working class town in Australia. A lot of people didn't go to university. A lot of people hadn't heard of Israel until, October 2023.
Mhm.
So, but since then, they've just been marinating in this narrative and propaganda, and they've come to learn the only correct opinion to have is that it's a genocide. So they just say it like it's nothing. And it's so actually, well, as you know, hurtful and painful to people who have actually suffered genocide and Holocaust.
Of course, of course. It's interesting because I think it's sort of in the reverse in the U.S. In the U.S., folks who are existing inside of, sort of rural working class communities, I suspect they would be less inclined to think it's genocide, and more importantly, I think they'd be just less inclined to be thinking about this topic in general. Here, it's amongst, this sort of economic and cosmopolitan elite of which I am sort of on the periphery, and so are men like this guy who I met. And New York is full of people like that. And I think amongst a certain like, well-educated, globe-trotting, ethnically ambiguous realm of which I somehow fit into, even though I don't really identify with it per se, it is just kind of like the de facto position that there is a genocide. I mean, there's always been this strain. I think that it's just been mostly on the fringes, and now obviously since October 7th, it's been weaponized, and in some ways, it's been institutionalized by the lack of a crackdown by the authorities. And I think it's just sort of permeated into the discourse. What's most concerning is sort of what I said, like that he didn't seem to think there was anything brazen about what he was saying or anything potentially offensive. He just sort of used it as part of like conventional, meet and greet with new people, a conversation, like I can't imagine before on October 6th, 2023, you could refer to Israel as a genocide nation and people wouldn't be up in arms. Now it's just sort of like, what else would you say,
It's true, and I think we've all experienced it. I'm not actually Jewish. My fiance is Jewish. All my Jewish friends, and look, unfortunately, I've lost a lot of friends since October 7th, and I guess the silver lining is that I've met so many incredible people, many of them Jewish, not all of them. Lots of really nice Gentile friends as well who are not terror sympathizers. They do exist. But yeah, it's like every social situation we go into, we're going to a party, we meet someone new, they're not Jewish. It's like when it comes up in conversation, is this going to be an issue? The fact that we don't hate Israel, we love Israel, and, not necessarily the government or anything, but just
Yeah.
Israel.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know if we're there yet in New York. It could just be the worlds in which I inhabit. But the thing is that those kinds of stories wouldn't be rare. That's
Yes.
what's changed. Like the level of acceptability of, disparaging a minority community that's also imperiled right now. So you have these two elements. It's a heavily minority community and a community that's imperiled, but there's been this sort of tolerance of disparagement that doesn't really exist for anybody else. And I think, that was what I was trying to, and that became part of the conversation I was having with Amir as our conversation continued. So as we, back to the genocide. So eventually he kept on saying it a few times. Again, as I say in the piece, what was interesting to me was that the way he spoke about it as sort of this obligation and as if it was this sort of radical notion. And I was like, well, that's exactly what Jews say in Israel. We have to have all these kids, or Jews say all over the world, in order to compensate for the 6 million lost during the Holocaust. So, I mean, that's also interesting because there's so much about the Palestinian narrative that they completely try to, so aggressively claim as original and their own and authentic and organic. And it's just like it's a complete, replication of everything that's come before.
Well,
And all,
Islam in general too.
I'm
It's
not going
very
to comment on.
derivative.
I'm not
Okay.
going to comment on. I don't want to go down that route. But I mean,
Okay.
I was like, even, and what's so insidious about this effort or this strategy is that it's so easily parroted by Hamas surrogates and movement surrogates around the world. Like when I did a few of the critical pieces on Ta-Nehisi Coates' book, The Message, that was released, I think 2 summers ago or summer and a half ago. There was one chapter, his passage, his whole book was so inane and so just poorly thought out and horribly realized. And I called it the Mein Kampf of the 21st century, and I completely stand by that statement. But he was talking about how after he came back from his life affirming trip to Palestine, he started hanging out with Palestinian communities in the Midwest. I think particularly in Dearborn, which we all know is it's like heavily Palestinian. And he was talking about this sort of like these mythic moments in these Palestinian diaspora families where they're speaking their own sort of like like lost language and dialects that is particular to their exile, and how it was very indicative of like the uniqueness and the innate specialness of this community above any other community. And all I could think to myself is like, that's what Jews do when they speak Yiddish. You know what I mean? It's exactly the same thing. But also that's what Black people do when they speak, colloquial Black language amongst each other. That's what all people do. And all people are around each other in a moment of exile. They speak in the language of that exile. Super duper niftily unique about this to Palestinians. Not that it doesn't matter to Palestinians. Of course it matters to them too, like it matters to everybody else. But
Hmm.
the reverence in which he was speaking, the way in which he elevated it to this, that is what is so almost like mythically incomprehensible. Is how has this movement attained this level of, I guess you might even say, when it actually deserves so little, and so much of it is derivative and like copied from their quote unquote oppressors. I've never seen a movement that is so indebted and so linked in origin for all of its manifestations to its own oppressor. That's what's so crazy about it.
Yeah. And I think the writer who encapsulates this the best for me is Pascal Bruckner. He's a French intellectual, not Jewish, I don't believe, but he wrote a fantastic book, The Tyranny of Guilt. And there's a
Hmm.
whole chapter on Holocaust inversion, essentially. He doesn't actually say it's inversion, but he says that the Holocaust, or the Shoah, represents the most powerful and the clearest example of human evil in our
Hmm.
lifetime that
Hmm.
we're aware of, and it has so much cultural power that so many groups have tried to use that for their own means. And I think that's what's happening now, and probably has been happening
Yeah, I mean that's why they use the term genocide in the first place. It's like they know it'll immediately provoke and incite and incense people. And that's what was so interesting about the conversation with this guy, because I kept on saying, as we were talking, eventually I said to him, if you want to have this conversation about the genocide, let's have a conversation about the genocide. But I want to let you know, like, I'm Jewish. I have spent a lot of time in Israel. I've had Israeli boyfriends. I've had, you're not my first, Arab Israeli paramour. I've been all over the Gulf region. I've been to the West Bank many, many times. So I also know what I'm talking about. But I also found it like it was actually for me, I have spent a lot of time around Israeli Arabs and also gay Israeli Arabs. My former Israeli boyfriend had a long time boyfriend after me who was Israeli Arab from Jaffa. And I've been lucky to have these real like friends who are gay Israeli Arabs, and we've talked a lot about what it means to be a gay Israeli Arab, what it means to be an Israeli Arab in general. But there's always in Israel there's always a power imbalance because I'm a Jew. I mean, I can admit that it's just baked into the system. I can admit that as a Zionist Jew, as somebody who is extremely proud to be Jewish and proud to have spent so much time in Israel. Like it just reflects the country's imperfect, like most countries. But it was interesting to have this conversation in the U.S. where that power imbalance doesn't exist because you're not living in a state that by default is preferential to Jews. And again, I'm not. I say that as in a very pro-Zionistic way, not anti-Zionistic way. So I was actually interested in having this conversation with them. I wanted to see what it would be like, and I also was interested in seeing I also, having worked at the New York Post and living in a little bit of a, bubble on the Upper East Side, I haven't encountered many guys like this before who were like, ready to sort of like, you know, change my mind and make me their project. I haven't been in this experience really very often. So I was very curious to see, what he had to say and how he had to say it. But also, like, I was also curious to see like how it would play out. Like, are we going to start like we're going to like start get to fists? And as we were talking about the genocide and me very clearly, and him listening, he listened. He really listened. I listened too. I explained to him that despite the tragedy of what's happening in Gaza, we could call it carnage. We could definitely say it's manipulated by Netanyahu's desire to stay in power. That's not a particularly deep thought. We could say there have been probably some examples of unfortunate lack of proper control. This has been a very, very, very messy, very bloody, very, very difficult war. So I am not saying that Israel is perfect here at all, but in no way does what's happened there meet the definition and standard of genocide. It just doesn't. It's not to dismiss and to say that every civilian death is not a tragedy. Of course it is. It's a tragedy caused by Hamas, and they should be held accountable for it. But it's not to say that these lost lives are not tragedies. Of course, they're tragedies. But even in the grossest examples, and he was giving me all kinds of statistics, like 250,000 dead, da 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 da. Again, like horrible numbers. Even if the statistic of 65,000 is correct, that's a horrible number. It's a horrible number that 1,200 Israeli soldiers have died. That's a tremendous number for a country like
But
Israel.
do you think he genuinely believes that Israel is trying to genocide the population?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't have an answer to that question. I don't know what he thinks exactly. I actually realized we didn't get to that. It was more about him. Again, it was very much him trying to change my mind. And me very clearly saying that, you're not going to change my mind. I'm as informed as you are. But also, I kept on saying to him, the problem with the embrace of the term genocide is that it has a very specific and particular meaning. And by misusing that meaning, like nobody is being served here, particularly not Palestinians. Like, by kind of clouding the real situation by the term genocide, you're making it impossible to sort of get anything done politically because everything has such political meaning and import. and unjustifiably. That's the worst part, but that's the tactic of Hamas. That's the tactic of like, an entity of chaos. Like the more chaos you create, the more power you wield, and they create chaos through disinformation and misinformation and half truths. I mean, that's what I was trying to convince this guy. And he was, as I put it in the piece, he was not nostalgic per se or sentimental. He acknowledged that Hamas was a very problematic entity, but it was very clear that he lay all the blame in Israel. And going back to your real question, do I think that he really thinks that Israel, like again, I kept on saying to him, genocide, suggests a level of intent, and the intent is what's not been proven here at all. I mean, I gave the example that, like, please forgive the sloppiness of this phrase, but genocide basically begins at home. If Israel wanted to commit a genocide against Arabs, there are 2 million Arabs in Israel that they could start
Exactly.
with. Yeah, you could say, well, public simply wouldn't support it, but this government is capable of a lot. And also, like, can't have where has there ever been a genocide where the population is actually increasing? I mean, cliche after cliche after cliche after cliche, But again, it's not to dismiss what's going on there. And he has lots of family there, and it was all very relevant and very personal to him, which is one of the reasons why I was so actually happy to speak with him. I'd rather talk to this dude who comes from, the West Bank than and who's like, grown and educated and clearly, well spoken and highly intelligent and sophisticated in his thinking than some like silly freshman with
Mm.
like bleached hair
Mm.
and,
West
nose
Bank of New
rings.
York.
Yeah, exactly. At the West Bank of Columbia, like I can't even bother. I don't even know how to have a conversation. Also, it was interesting. Like I was struck by this week. I was walking past the UN on the way home, and there is this like keffiyeh chick walking down the street from the UN. Like she had her whole face covered in keffiyeh. She was like a keffiyeh warrior, and she was just like strutting down. I guess it's like 44th Street or something like that, going towards the river, going towards the main UN building. Like she fucking, forgive my language, like owned the city, And I was just like, started laughing at her. I was like, you're like a joke. You're like a Halloween, like, Halloween Hamas, yeah. And she immediately started like, swearing and
You said that to her.
saying,
Whoa,
but of
good
course
for you.
her response was heavily vulgar and heavily profane. And going back to this time with Amir, it was like, I was, they say in the piece, I stopped us like mid conversation. I said to him, like, not to sound corny, but like, I'm really proud of us. We've had this conversation. It's a very difficult conversation, very delicate, and not once have we raised our voice. Not once have we really interrupted. Not once have we been rude or unkind. And more importantly, I feel like we've actually really listened to each other and given each other the chance to sort of like, not present their case, but like say how they feel.
And
Like
he
it was.
agreed?
Yeah, he totally agreed.
Nice.
And it was just very, and it got me thinking. This also like like in the wake of Charlie Kirk, like just got me thinking about this whole issue of civility and how we keep on saying that like our culture has lost civility, like what's gone, especially in the U.S. because it's become so politically polarized. Is to me, it just feels like a lot of laziness, like I do
Cop out.
feel like, well, I mean, if this dude and I can be civil to each other in this very awkward, basically, irrelevant basics, stranger dudes in bed with each other, if we can be civil with each other in this very awkward moment, having a very real conversation, and also kind of knowing when, okay, the conversation's over, like time to go home.
I think as well, doing it in having that conversation in person, especially after
Exactly.
being vulnerable with
Yes.
someone,
Yes.
it actually reminds me, I had a sort of life-changing moment, definitely life-changing for me and for him. I met a guy when I was in my early 20s. I was backpacking in Berlin, actually, and he was a very sort of lanky, nebbish, Dutch, Flemish, Belgian guy, whatever.
All right.
And he wasn't the guy I'd usually go for, but I was drunk, I was on holidays, whatever. He was funny. Anyway, to cut a long story short, I end up at his, and the morning after he said, "You're Australian, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Oh, I'm actually not allowed to go to Australia for a few more years." And and I said, "Shit, like what have you done? Drugs, like importation, like what did you do?" He said, "Oh, I was in Australia with my boss and the foreign minister. There was a huge petition and the foreign minister, cancelled our visas. I'm going, okay, who's your boss? And he said that his boss was at the time, infamous PUA pickup artist
Chicken.
by the
Okay.
name of Julian LeBlanc. And as soon as he said that name, I thought, shit, I signed that petition. As a young feminist, I signed a petition that said the Australian government should ban, what did we call him? Not rape denier, that he taught rape through his techniques of teaching men how to go out and approach women and date women, blah, 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 that he was teaching rape and sexual assault. Anyway, this guy, was his assistant, and they got to Sydney Airport but were denied entry. And
My.
it was a really strange moment because at the time I was very much, on board with hating this guy, and I was very woke, to cut a long story short. And I felt quite disgusted to be there in bed, and I could feel my heart rate, sort of racing, thinking I've just slept with the enemy, essentially. But what happened was we had a really, really good conversation, and I gained empathy and realized why this guy needed to, or was led to, this sort of dating guru. And it's because he had, autism and was abused as a child and had severe social anxiety and couldn't talk to anyone, let alone a woman. And through this guy's techniques, I mean, it obviously
Is he
worked. He
like
was in bed
is
with
he
me.
like an incel whisperer?
Yes, he was. He
That's
was.
what it sounds like. It's creepy.
And well, my opinion changed. I think everyone, I mean, we won't get into it because I want to talk about more interesting topics, but I think teaching people social skills, if you frame it as that and just that, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Obviously, if you're teaching men or anyone how to manipulate vulnerable women, that's really messed up. And there's the line is blurred at times. But I think simply teaching men who have zero success with women how to get some success, I don't think that's a bad thing inherently.
No, but I mean, I think the problem is that you can't really teach it. That's the problem. It's like,
Mm,
or you have to like awaken something that's innate. It's all about, yeah, all about confidence, you know. That's a
yeah.
really hard thing to, that's the first thing that's beaten out of people is their confidence. That's how the bad guys work. They
Oh,
beat
yeah.
the confidence out of you.
Yeah.
They extinguish it. So it's
Yeah.
really hard
I
to get
think
that back.
especially too, I mean, I'm not sure if the gay world has been affected or afflicted by this as much. Sure you probably have been to some extent, but just like approaching women in public, bars, things like that. I mean, Americans are different, but Aussies are very reserved. Australian men do not approach women, especially now after like Me Too and stuff. Like it just doesn't happen as
I
much.
mean, I don't really go to it bars at all.
Right.
You know, I sort of like hang out with my twins, but so I don't know. I mean, I will say that I think most of the kids today are meeting each other online very quickly. But again, I don't know. I don't know how to meet each other.
Well,
Um,
they're
anyway,
losing their virginities later, and they're not socializing as
yeah.
much. But anyway, I did want to make a point too that your piece reminded me. I'd sort of forgotten that people are homophobic. I forgot that some people are really actually homophobic because I saw that in the responses.
I thought the response on IG was quite homophobic. The response on Twitter
Always,
or X was seemed more
yeah,
intelligent. I was actually surprised at like, I mean, yeah, I was surprised. I mean, I don't usually write this kind of stuff. I mostly write, you know, harder core political things. But
yes,
I just felt like, you know, there needed to be a bit of a shock to the system. You know what I mean?
yeah,
And you needed to be what's missing so much in this conflict post October 7th between everybody are attempts to like personalize experiences and not necessarily to, you know, make them universal. Not this piece is not trying to universalize anything. I mean, I say
exactly,
at the end that, you know, we kind of like, you know, when I joked to him, oh, I said to him, well, we should meet, you know, we should do it again. And he was like, yes, we had a great time. I mean, we both
Mm,
knew that wasn't going to
probably
happen.
not.
There was no need for that. And as I say in the piece, I was like, the next time we probably wouldn't have been so civil to each other, you know? And so I think this is not about, you know, he didn't change his mind and I didn't change my mind. You know, I write that, you know, basically, you know, he wanted his people to stop dying. That's what he wants. But I want the same thing. I actually want his people to stop dying too. I want all the people to stop dying. I think for folks like me who are heavily invested in this post-October 7th period, right now, at the end of the day, we just want this war to be over. It just needs to be over, whatever it takes. It needs to be over. And if that means like, I had the conversation with a woman a couple of weeks ago at some sort of like respectable, like, New York, Upper East Side, fancy Jewish event, and she was heavily critical of Trump, as I am. Um, but I was there with another woman who's more favorable to Trump, but I kind of said to her, I've never been, particularly someone like me who's also African American and have a lot of feet in a lot of different groups. But for me, like, I've never had the luxury of being a one issue voter. But
Mm,
for the moment, the only thing I care about is ending the war in Gaza. That's the only thing to me that matters politically. There are lots of other things that are on my mind, but this is the most important thing. If it means Trump outsmarts everyone, is able to get a win, then that's the price we're going to have to pay. Like, nothing's free in this world,
yeah.
and this war has been really costly. So, the price of ending it is going to be high, and that price could really be a, uh, uh, not just a triumphant Trump, but like, an emperor Trump. I mean, if he ends this war, there's a real sense. You don't forget, like, Trump has been able to like put an end to many, many global conflicts since he's been in office that have not gotten a lot of attention. He did it in Rwanda and Congo. He did it with Azerbaijan, and there's a few other examples where he's really very. I mean, he said that he was the one who put an end to the India-Pakistan skirmish.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, in very typical Trump insanity, I think when he was sitting down and signing the peace accord between Rwanda and Congo in the White House, he basically said, "I don't really know what this war was about, but I'm happy I was able to end it." Which just, you're just thinking to yourself, like, you've already had your like administration to warm up. Now you got to play like the big guys. Like, you can't be saying things like that. If you're able to like end an important global conflict, you need to own it, bro.
Yeah.
So that's Trump. But if he's able to end this war, and it looks like it's possible. I mean, I'm not there yet. I don't know if it's going to happen. Like, I still don't understand what Hamas gains from this. Like, what is their incentive? Explanation is that they've begun to value their own people, which, seems like a logical explanation for a political party that, rules a territory with 2 million people. But they've shown no behavior or indication they've ever cared about their people. So what would explain this sudden turn of face? I don't know. Again, like, I
Maybe it's
just
that that they have to give the impression that they care about their people because all eyes are on them and on the Palestinian cause.
right. Right. I agree that there is additional pressure on Hamas to sort of deliver something. I also think that, like, as much as, Netanyahu had to bow to the Qataris and apologize for the attack on Doha, I think that there still is, the Qataris are suddenly really putting pressure on Hamas in a way they haven't. There is like this squeezing of Hamas that there hasn't been before. And just at the same time, there's a squeezing of Netanyahu that there hasn't been before. So there is this kind of like bilateral squeezing, but still it's like, it's just hard for me to understand, like, what is, like, I just don't understand why Hamas would give in to this. I actually, I almost catch myself saying that. I don't want to, like, give bad vibes here, give like ayin ra, as you say, a bad eye, but because I want this to go through. I mean, I can't imagine what these hostage families are even going through right now. They're so close to getting their loved ones home, but like, it's still far. Like, until they're home, they're not home.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't trust anything or get excited about anything until I see those hostages being
Yeah.
released.
Yeah. So anyway,
Hamas
that
just
was
keeps
what
saying,
that was the piece I wrote about this, kind of like romantic encounter. I have not sent it to him. I've thought about sending it to him. I don't know. I did a very good job of concealing his identity because he
yeah.
obviously, it's not something I think that he would want, broadcast around.
It's a great piece and I will link it and I hope everyone reads it. But I do want to talk as well about what you're writing on Zohran.
Yeah, it's not.
So, yeah, give us an update. I mean, I'm here in Sydney. I know a bit about him. We've published about
Yeah.
him. What's the update
So
there?
yeah, so he's the Democratic front runner to the
Hmm.
mayorship, and he's very anti-Israel. He's pro-socialist. I worked, full disclosure, for the mayor for a couple of months.
Eric Adams.
Adams on their comms team. We did not succeed, as obvious. And now I was writing before about how Mamdani is not the best thing, and now I'm really writing about how Mamdani is not the best thing. But what I read about in this piece in the Telegraph today is I sort of say that Mamdani is sort of like the bastard child of October 7th, but not even sort of like a bastard, because that would almost suggest like a one night stand and illegitimacy. No, he's attained this incredible legitimacy and formalization through the lens of October 7th. October 7th sort of opened the floodgates to the international tide of anti-Semitism, international tide of anti-Zionism, aggressive, brazen, violent anti-Israel proclamations, a complete disregard, disrespect for the nation's sovereignty and even right to exist. And Mamdani basically epitomizes all that. And he is the first chance for these folks who believe as he does, of which there are far terrifyingly many. He gives them the first chance to actually do something, to take an action, to express their
Legitimacy.
frustration. Yeah,
Mm.
and to express their frustration,
Hmm.
with Netanyahu, with Israel, with the U.S. government, with Trump. They have a safe space, the ballot box, to show their furor against Israel and its support network. And Mamdani is, very cannily eating that up, and he is unprecedented and unbridled, unstoppable in a way in his critiques of Israel, of Netanyahu. And more than one commentator has said that he possesses this like Israel mania that is extremely, hard to fully understand, especially because he is going to be an elected local official of New York City. So he has no real power to affect geopolitical change or, impact, the Middle East. And he can't arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he comes to, he doesn't have those powers. So these folks are voting for him under the illusion, he is like a cipher almost for this,
Symbolic.
yeah, for this like fantasy that finally we can take action against those Israelis, those Zionists. And
Mm.
he's just eating it up, and he's just like, I'm just gonna go with it. This is like really working for me. So
Yeah, it came
that, that's
at the right time for him.
yes.
So why do you think he's more popular than Eric Adams, for example, or Cuomo? Or
Yeah, I mean, he definitely is. He has appeal.
he's good looking, he's young.
he, you
Yeah,
know,
that's
he's
okay.
he's he's very, he's young, he's
He's
cute,
good looking.
he's good looking, but not in an overly intimidating way.
Yeah,
He's
in
the
touch with
product.
meme culture and stuff as well.
And
And
also,
like,
he
yeah.
is the product of the global international elite and is very
Hmm.
comfortable in being amongst a lot of different kinds of people. And he's able to express that comfort very, very authentically, and probably in some ways is quite true. But he's also, he's escaped the kind of scrutiny that most other candidates that would be, lauded upon most other candidates. I mean, he's been able to sort of slip through gaffe after gaffe, and the media led by the New York Times basically says we don't care, and then that's sort of framed against these two other candidates, Adams and Cuomo, who have had extremely long, extremely public political careers where they had plenty of mess.
And
When you're like
COVID and all of that as well, right?
just the mess of being a New York
Yeah.
politician. You know what I mean? It's like there's just mess that goes along with it. And Mamdani he's like, how would he even get messy? He's never even been, he's never really even been exposed to mess, a kid like that. So you're not going to find mess for him. The only mess is when, the New York Times is following him to like a restaurant to see how he eats and if he makes a mess, that kind of mess. That was an article last week, another one of their epic obsessive articles with Mamdani. They followed him on like a food run. That's just like, that's masterful media and PR. You got to give a hand to his people. Like, well done.
Yeah.
But it just turns him into this kind of like palatable, oh shucks, brand that is going to be
Mm.
it's going to be very difficult to beat.
So, what you mentioned briefly in your piece as well that you've become more of an Israel advocate. Are you going to continue with that? What are your plans for the next few years? You no longer work at the New York Post.
Yeah. I want to write a book about all of this stuff. I've been talking about it for a long time. Everybody's tired of hearing me talk about it, so it's time to really make it happen. I want to keep on writing and writing in a more truly sort of personal and, I was saying to a friend, like braver way. It's like time to be. We need to live in a moment of valor and bravery. And I think I have interesting stories to tell. I'm full of stories like this. It's not the first time I encountered. I had a tussle with an Arab Israeli
The
in
bedroom.
not safe for work moment. So there's a whole other story. There's plenty of them. So I think that like I just I've been lucky to have had a very experience rich life, and I think that there's a lot to share about it, and I think one of the things about me is as exemplified by this story with Amir is that I feel like I not maybe it's just a survival mechanism because of who I am, and I have so many feet and I'm so intersectional, as the kids would say, that I've
You're like the
always
UN,
yeah, I've
essentially.
always tried to find commonalities with people, and I think I've been really lucky in having an ability to do that. And that also, I'm also just really curious and I want to know about people. I'm very, very effective. I have an Oprah quality to me. I mean, I'm definitely effective getting people to open up to me. So, and I'm just curious about the human experience. So
Well,
I
New
want
York
to
City
write.
must be the right place for that.
Yes and no. I mean, there's New York has people who kind of want to be like other people, so that kind of extinguishes their humanity and their human experience. I mean, there are interesting people with human experiences everywhere. The trick is
Mm.
to like be able to listen to them. And I want to, now I don't have this kind of crazy job, so I have a little bit more time to slow down and really listen.
I did want to ask about all your intersectionality
Okay.
because it's interesting. We rail against identity politics a bit, but it is simply curious that you have a black dad from Houston, I believe.
Yeah.
Your mum's Ashkenazi Jewish. You're a gay man. You have children. Do all of those different aspects of who you are? Is there a commonality between like? Do you think the sort of black experience informs the Jewish experience, or are they just unrelated?
No, 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 no. Everything's related. You can't ever put these things away. It doesn't work like that. And I mean, I grew up in a mostly white and somewhat Jewish environment, so it would be unrealistic to say that hasn't in some ways dominated my life and more than the black side. But at the
Did you
same
grow up in New
time,
York?
I grew up in San Francisco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But at the same time, especially as I've gotten older, because as I become a father, like I don't say I feel more black, but I feel less and less, white per se, if that's a way of saying it. Even though
Interesting.
I've never actually felt white because I know I'm not white, but I feel more disconnected from sort of these. I'm more aware of my difference as I get older, especially
What
having
is it
having
about fatherhood that brought that out?
Well, if you want to be a good parent, you have to interact with the other parents. You can't
Mm.
hide from them because your kids hopefully will get along with their children, and you'll want to be invited to birthday parties, and you want to have birthday parties like the other parents actually come to. And we're already like a gay couple, we're already divorced, so it's like we already have all these strikes against us, even though our children have the best birthday parties and we're very popular. But my point is like you just really have to like find these commonalities. And as I find them, and I can see, I live in a predominantly like, white neighborhood, so as I find the commonalities, because that's how I was raised amongst white people. So it's not particularly, it's not new for me or particularly uncomfortable. But I also see as I get older, having kids and, the differences, the class differences, or the economic differences, or the worldview differences. And, I'm generally the only person who's like me in these circumstances. You're just aware that you're always aware that there is some difference. And you can't really ever like deny it or say it doesn't matter. It always matters, but it's like my former boyfriend who I shout out in the piece, who was not so down with my pro-Israel worldviews. He asked me once, like, why is everything in America always about race? He was just so, like, to him it was like he was very humanist and he was very pure in many ways. And, to him, it was like, it wasn't that it was like, evil or bad. It was more like it was offensive. It was like, I don't want to exist like this. I don't want to exist in a world where we are so focused on difference when there's so much commonality. But, he understood that there was almost, he said, he's just unavoidable. It's unavoidable. And I think, listen, he was a very open-minded person. He lived in Harlem and he really made an effort to connect himself with all the cultures in New York City. So I think that someone like him, and he was with me, so he was confronted by these things. But most people like him would only have, white friends, so they
Mm.
would never have to think about these things. I mean, race only becomes always an issue when you're around people who are not white. If you're
Yeah,
only around white people, then race is never an issue because nobody talks about it because it doesn't really affect them. And
exactly.
that's, again, as an observation,
Mm.
not to bash the white people.
Yeah, it's a product of multiculturalism in a way.
Yes,
That you're confronted with differences every day. And
exactly.
I think humans are inherently quite racist, I think, and I think it's actually our culture that, especially our, Western culture, that I'm a Western chauvinist, that makes that a taboo to be racist. Despite what a lot of people say, I don't think that Australia is inherently racist, or my experience in the States isn't like that. There's obviously racism, but compared to other nations, I mean, it's very blatant in Japan or
Yeah, I mean, I'm not so sanguine as you are. I mean, I think it still has, it's still a very racist country, and it's funny because I'm very anti-woke. I hate woke language. It makes me like get the jeebies. I actually don't like the term systematic racism. I actually agree with this idea of there is some very clear level of white supremacy in America. There's no question about it. It's so baked into our culture, and I don't say that, I say that as a critique, not a criticism. I mean, it
mm,
is a critique, but it's more a critique as an observation. But I say in the same way that, like, there's, male supremacy. I can see how there's male supremacy because I'm a man and I'm aware of how in some ways, the quote unquote privilege I have over women. Like, to say that I wouldn't be, it's just stupid. You know what I mean? It's like, we know
I
that.
don't agree with the male privilege thing per se.
I don't
But
like
I
that.
know
For
that
me, it's
like
not the same. I don't like the
I
term.
know
I'm
you're
not
more
saying, like,
physically
I'm not saying
strong, but
privilege.
that's it.
I'm saying no, 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 no. But it's not just that. You can see how, when a man walks into a room, or I have to help my mother with something, the man is taken more seriously. Like, just all these sort of standards that are
I
part
get
of
a
the
lot of
culture.
attention for being a young woman who's like conventionally good looking and thin and
Yeah,
stuff, and that's not
I
going to
know.
last forever. I feel a
Hey,
lot more power than a
yeah,
lot of
yeah.
my male.
Well, but the thing is about it, though, is that you don't, that's the thing about these kind of power dynamics. You actually don't know. That's, that's what's so problematic and so powerful about these power dynamics that are centered around identities. At the end of the day, the manifestation, the outcomes of those powers, you don't know. That's why they're so contested. That's why this notion of race and racism is so powerful and scary and meaningful, is because we can't actually necessarily demonstrate the physicality of the consequence, outcome, or
Mm,
result of it. So we're constantly, like, in this, like, intellectual like tizzy, like hurricane,
rumination, yeah.
when we're trying to sort of argue around it, improve it, and, like, do this and that, because we actually don't know we cannot be 100% certain always what the manifestation is. So
Mm.
my point simply is that, like, I'm not living in some fantasy world where these isms no longer exist. I know they exist. I see them personally every single day. There's where I, as sort of, I guess, from my own experience, is that, I mean, I'm just sort of most of the time, I do feel a sort of privilege. It sounds corny, but, like, the way in which I'm able to sort of slip into spaces and experiences and communities in ways that most people aren't is actually quite exciting, and like it's fun. And would I have preferred, like, not to resort to stereotypes, but like, the money associated with generations of white inherited wealth? Yeah, I would like that too. But I also feel um like when I've traveled a lot, and I can see immediately how when I show up somewhere where people are kind of brown, like you're just immediately in the club, even if you can't speak one word to them. And I think that like that's what's made me so suited for journalism, is that I have this like ability to sort of like slip into moments in a way that most people don't, and I can sort of feel very comfortable in all of them. And it gives me access to a world that, for the most part, I find very interesting, and I'm never not amazed by the sheer number of stories that are still there to be told. I'm always shocked that, like, if I stumble upon something interesting, like, how is it possible this has not been discovered? But this is what AI cannot take from us, but like it's the limitlessness of our imagination. And like, I guess also going back to my piece, it was like that limitlessness of imagination should allow us to imagine being able to be around people we don't agree with. I think that's what it really comes down to, is there's this expectation now that we can only be around people that we agree with. That's the standard. I was at like a swanky book party a couple of weeks ago, and I saw a friend who I respect enormously, who is just such an accomplished journalist and woman. And we share very different views on Gaza. And we immediately, saw each other and embraced. And I was like, how both of our sons are named Luca. And then after all that, we finally got to like, oh, I can't believe we're still talking to each other. But people were just like astounded at our salute, the way we saluted each other and greeted each other as friends. Like, I can't believe you guys actually, can be so good to each other. You are such, and we have completely divergent views on Gaza. Period. Like, she's all into genocide. But they were really astounded that we were able to sort of engage with each other and with such, like, genuine warm affection. I was like, well, people like work harder. You know what I mean? It's like, I don't agree with this woman, but I completely agree with her right to have her views. In fact, it's her obligation to have these views. She's like been at the front lines of like every major global conflict of the last 30 years all over the world, and she's been to Gaza many, many times. So I have such respect for her. And I was just like, her name's Janine Di Giovanni. She's a tremendous journalist. I have such respect for her that anything she says to me, I might not agree with it, but I take it very seriously. And I take very seriously her right, and she's earned the right to speak this way. And by living in a world where we only want to be around people who think like us, we deny people
Mm,
their own lives and their accomplishment just
mm.
because like it makes us uncomfortable. Well, we need to man up, to person up as well.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. And I think, some of the best conversations I've had with people since the war, like one that comes to mind is an Egyptian Christian guy I know who was born in Australia, but his parents were born in Egypt and, have seen war between Egypt and Israel and really do have skin in the game. And we had a very respectful conversation, similar to your conversation. We definitely didn't see eye to eye on the Israel-Palestine conflict. He was very, very anti-Israel, but he listened to me. I felt respected. I listened to him. Again, not going to change each other's minds too much,
Yeah.
I don't think, but it was good. Contrast that with the amount of friends I've lost since October 7th who were just like white chicks from the small town I grew up in who were trying to virtue signal online and show that they're a good person by using, all the right language and stuff. They really annoy me and they really, really upset me. And I actually didn't choose to cut off those connections. They did because I was like seen as a social pariah,
Yeah.
whatever. But I do not have much respect for them, and I'm not sure whether I could, embrace it. I wouldn't.
Yeah. I mean, if they were, yeah, I mean, it just seems like the problem with folks who are so uninformed is that they speak with this level of authority that doesn't
Mm,
really allow them to engage any sort of dissent. So you can't have a conversation with them. There's just almost no
mm,
point. Because also they don't, I mean, they don't know what they're talking about. That was one of the things that was interesting about, Mir, that he so knew what he was talking about. I mean, his POV about what he was talking about was completely different than mine, but like he was an intellectual equal, very much so. And I needed to show him the respect that he deserved because I considered him to be, he knew his shit. I needed to take him seriously, you know. Anyway,
okay. I think we should wrap it up. Do you
yeah,
have anything else you'd like to say to the world?
no, just hello from New York, and thank you for taking the time to listen to this. I hope you got something out of it.
And thank you for writing such a personal, vulnerable piece, and hopefully we see some more.
I hope so. Thank you.
Thank you.